Hey, I'm building a game in which all enemies are made by a genetic algorithm. As you fight your way through the caves on a quest for epic loot, the game lets your most successful enemies breed and pass on their genes. Through evolution, the system then learns and creatures adapt to your playstyle. Usually, I use these devlogs to satisfy my unhealthy need to discuss blueprints and mechanics, cool science, and charts. But today is different. Today I'm ready to show off the actual gameplay. This game is quite experimental, so getting to this point took a while. See, on one hand, evolution needs to explore lots of options, which means the combat has to stay engaging and fun across many generations of creatures. But at the same time, I want your actions and decisions to have a quick and direct impact on evolution. Then I want systems to be generic, so that you'll see unique body shapes and new situations arise every run. But each feature I add to the creatures also makes it harder to control the outcome. So what I showed today are 2 runs of the current campaign. This makes the devlog longer than previous ones. If you don't have the time, feel free to jump forward to the second run, where I only picked out a few quick highlights. But first, I would like to welcome you back to the world of Where Beasts Were Born. This devlog is a milestone, because I've now started private alpha testing. If you don't want to miss your first chance to playtest yourself, please wishlist the game on Steam or subscribe below. In the game we can configure many options. I still have to find good default values. But for this run we'll start with a relatively high mutation rate of 30%. The default target function is configured to reward creatures that attack often and deal the most damage to the players. This can lead to pretty aggressive behavior. So unlike before, the game now starts in a small safe zone. We can't go down into the main cave just yet because the creature generator is still busy breeding the first generation. But your group of minions will always be here in the safe zone, so the idea is that you can trade and re-equip while you're waiting. I usually start by checking what the trader currently has. Many of these items will become useful when we start breeding spells in a minute. For now, we should just make sure that we have a few spirit crystals ready to capture spirits in. Alright, let's jump straight into the main cave. The 2 most common resources in the caves are small scrubs that you can graft into bolts, and small magic mushrooms. The mushrooms have 2 uses for now. They heal the player, and you can use their sap as the nutrition you need for keeping your spirits alive. That's the flux down here, and you can only breed spells if you have enough of it. In the campaign, the main quest is to... Oh, hello. So this first encounter is a great place to tell you about how I create the first generation. I start with some random DNA. Then I mutate it a few times and use the results to create creature groups. So these groups share DNA and often look like they may be related. But this random start of DNA means that, just by pure chance, creatures may already be very strong. As you can see, I'm really struggling here. I will need to control these first generations a bit more to ease new players into the game. For now, I just limit the genes which control the overall size and health to avoid huge creatures with lots of hit points in the early levels. But at the moment, that's the only thing I control manually. Beyond that, nothing here is scripted. The creatures have behavior genes which makes them more or less likely to pursue me. The genes also control which kinds of attacks the creatures prefer and whether they like to group up. But I love how dynamic everything is already. Alright, so the quest system. Our goal is to collect these larger, rare mushrooms in each cave. These are also the homes of ancient spirits that you can capture and bind to your spirit crystals. But usually you first have to perform a capturing ritual of some sort. For now it's enough to perform a quick chant, but as the spirits will grow stronger, you might have to go through more steps in order to break their willpower. If you don't, Then they will simply escape and happily disappear, finally freed from this realm. We're lucky to find a second large mushroom nearby. And we captured both spirits. So let's go and find a third one. Once we have enough giant mushroom marrow, we can try to escape. Now, theoretically, you never have to defeat any creatures in the game, but they will become increasingly aggressive over time, so it will be hard to avoid all conflict. And that's sort of the story behind the game as well. You're destroying these creatures' livelihood, and they become more and more aggressive as you do so. You are the bad guy. Or bad woman, really. I currently don't plan to add any male characters. There are enough male-dominated games out there, I think. The cave map now shows all creatures in the cave. We can also have a first look at the statistics. The game records pretty much every metric about body shapes, as well as genes that steer the behavior. For now, it only plots the average over the generation, so that's not really interesting until we've seen some more generations. We also found paths to 2 new caves, so let's enter the next one. Ah, there's a crafting table here. That's good. Let's get some more stuff from the trader. When I mouse over the spirit breeders, it will show me that some of them have a processor slot. This means I can connect processors into these, which will modify and mutate my spirits during the cloning process. On the crafting table, we see our captured spirits in the crystals on the left. The center shows the current spirit breeder setup. The new breeder that I bought has this additional processing slot. So let's pull in a crystal to act as a source. We can drag it to the analyzer, which destroys one spirit and shows me its properties. Next, I'll add a heater. The spirits multiply inside the crystal until it's full, and then they spill over into the processors and are passed through the chain into the container at the end. Now these spirits are hotter, and that'll change their in-game properties and behavior. Casting a spell in this game just means taking a spirit from your active spirit breeder and throwing it into the scene. These current ones actually have small blades attached to them, which deal a bit of slash damage. Spellcasting may look easy here, but according to the world's lore, only the witch's great power and wickedness allows them to handle the angry spirits without getting torn apart themselves. Here I forgot to get a new spirit crystal. Now, the caves are generated randomly, and this particular one has very little space that is flat and accessible, and so the game places all major resources here near the starting area. That was a bug initially, but I think I might intentionally put these kinds of caves in strategic places during the campaign. For now, let's quickly skip into the next cave and see if there's more to find there. The trader here finally has a weapon I'm interested in. It deals slightly more pierce damage. We're still in Generation 0. In this next cave, things start getting interesting again. The random creatures here are small and they like to jump attack. I need to make the health display a bit easier to see and maybe place it near the player. I almost missed that I'm running out of health here. But in the end I do manage, and now we can also start searching if these creatures had anything of use for us. Each ingredient that we can harvest has its own effect when you grind it down and feed it to your spirits. At this point I still have to decide what kinds of spellers I want to breed. But to deal with these small and fast creatures, it might be good to have some sort of area control spells. Here, it's a bit suboptimal that I've fought right on a mushroom patch, because the mushrooms heal the creatures as well. With enough mushrooms collected, we can leave the cave again. Ah, this new cave is the largest one we've been in so far. I'm actually quite happy with how diverse the randomly generated caves are. I might make a video on how I generate them at some point. For this demo I created around 15 caves and let the game randomly choose one for each level. That might mean that I encounter the same geometry every now and then. So by now I know most caves, but the mushrooms and creature nests get spawned randomly. And I sometimes do get lost, which I think is pretty cool. I think exploration will be a fun thing in the game. I want it to be a high risk, high reward kind of thing, because the loot will be rare and powerful, but you always run the risk of running into a new group of deadly creatures. You can see that I rotate the camera every now and then to look into directions that I can't see otherwise. I'm not sure yet how much camera rotation I will allow in the final game. It's pretty cool to be able to look into deep canyons and check the ceiling for creatures, but it also really messes up your sense of direction. Many people have actually suggested to try a first-person camera, and I might give that a try at some point. There are a few creatures along the way, but they decide not to attack, which is fine by me. I'll now fast forward a bit, because my real goal for this video is to see evolution. Alright, after harvesting enough giant mushrooms, the game decides that we've encountered enough creatures to start the breeding process and go further down to the next depth and meet the next generation. At this point it might be fun to pause and think about what creatures were the most successful. Remember, we measure success by the amount of damage that they dealt. Those are the ones that should now pass on their genes to the next generation. Because I want exploration to be a thing, but also need lots of encounters, I added the knife weapon. You run faster while holding only the knife, but it's not really useful in a fight. Oh, first creature of the second generation. So it looks like it's a descendant of the larger creatures from before, but it's quite easy to scare off. When I hit the legs of the creatures, they break and become useless, and the creatures become a bit slower. But at the moment, broken legs often stick out to the side and look weird. Another thing to maybe fix at some point. Overall, the volume of the creatures seems to have increased. But the new ones we had just encountered were not very aggressive, so that was lucky. In the next cave, they are much smaller again and are quite hard to hit. What I haven't mentioned yet is that I can control what body part I'm aiming at over here. This also controls what body parts my spells will target. The ones we currently have are quite weak, but their control values seem to be quite strong. which makes them precisely target enemies and follow them around. You can see here that my system sometimes still has trouble moving thin creatures. They sometimes still tunnel through the ground and their long legs move weirdly. I enabled a few debug display functions here, but I'm not going to look into it right now. The next group I encounter is again very different. They seem to have inherited their larger bodies from one creature type, but the jumping behavior from another creature type. By the way, if you remember the sound effects from last time, you might notice that we've made a ton of progress on that front, together with a professional sound effect artist. There's a new dynamic ecosystem in place that adjusts to the current empty space around the player. Also, the creatures now choose from a palette of sound effects based on their DNA. For now, you can just use this to distinguish their attacks from each other. In the long run, I want to use this for simple communication between creatures. Some sounds are definitely still placeholders, like for the spear attack we don't have a good sound yet. But overall, the sound has improved so much. Looks like we found a path further down into the next level. Before continuing, I want to start crafting some better spirits. Now, the trader has a more efficient processor and a breeder with 2 processing slots. That's great news because now I can start combining effects. I will try to make hot and chaotic spirits with low control values, which I can do with a heater and by feeding them blood. The control values turn negative now, and the spirits may explode upon impact. Low control values also mean that spirits behave and move more chaotically. And here we quickly see the first explosions. They're quite small, but might already be useful when we encounter larger groups of small creatures. At this point, I'm still aiming for the heads, and I notice that I miss quite a lot. I get the feeling that may be an evolutionary advantage if I don't change my tactic. You'll also again sometimes see a creature's leg sticking to the side without being used. That usually means I've somehow hit that leg even though I was aiming for the head. I will start speeding up some of these sequences. I'm mostly interested in seeing evolution do its thing, so I want to concentrate on the encounters. The current damage system has 3 physical damage types: pierce, slash, and blunt damage. But then there are also the elemental damage types: heat, cold, and poison. Strong armor can help the creatures deflect physical damage, but it might increase the effects of elemental damage. You can see that the explosions briefly stun the creatures, which is also going to be useful. But to really have an impact, I need to breed them to be stronger. The creatures have started to attack with their legs a bit more. I wasn't ready for that here, so we'll see if that becomes a trait which endures. Going deeper, we meet a new witch who agrees to join our party. Now, according to the game's lore, all witches are evil and selfish and kind of hate each other, but sometimes they will put aside their differences if they can see a benefit in joining forces. This new witch is a bit of a tank. She can carry more weapons and more spirit breeders, so it's probably a good idea to quickly capture a few spirits for her. Ah, and we're lucky, this seems to be one of those small caves with lots of resources. In the next cave, we again find better spirit breeders and can start crafting stronger spirits. At this point, I noticed there's a bug in the damage computation. The damage a spirit does didn't get updated when processing. I've since fixed that issue, but since all other effects worked fine, I'll just continue here. It just means that the spirits were less powerful than intended during this run. By the way, this is the kind of thing that made it really hard to make this devlog. I often recorded an hour of footage, then I noticed something I needed to fix or change, and then I had to start the run all over again for things to stay consistent throughout the video. It just eats up so much development time. If you want more frequent, smaller updates, feel free to join our Discord. I post all sorts of work in progress and behind the scenes content there. And here, for the first time, one of my characters died. I think it was a mixture of creatures performing a pretty smart attack and my carelessness because I thought this was a safe cave. For now, the permadeath setting means that as long as one character survives, we can revive the others, and only when all characters die, you lose the game. In the next cave, I found a better spear for my scout. This quickly came in handy because I started to notice that my companion AI was kind of lazy. When I added the knife, I had to change how the AI switches between weapons, because when I run around with a knife, they should also switch to the knife so that they become faster and can follow. And I think they're somewhat confused by that. So that needs fixing. But when they're active, they can really change how a battle goes. Notice that the tank character can throw multiple spirits at once, which can be really fun. And the glaive weapon that they use is also quite powerful against multiple nearby enemies. But not powerful enough, I guess. At the next depth, I spent some time fine-tuning my character build. The cores that we collect from giant mushrooms can also be fed to the spirits. They increase their malleability, so all processes that come after this one will have a stronger effect. I also noticed that creatures seem to be getting bigger on average, but I don't yet know if that's really to their advantage. One thing that I added only recently is that creatures can try to pack up with other creatures of a certain size. So a small creature type could prefer to stay close to larger creatures for protection. I don't know if that's what's happening here, but either way, I had a hard time fighting this group. You'll really have to watch your party. I'm also wondering why many creatures seem to evolve these long front legs. Maybe it's just one of those cases where evolving something just doesn't give enough of a disadvantage for it to disappear again. Or maybe it just increases their jumping distance. I'll have to look at my code again. By the way, the green dots above the creatures here mean that they've been poisoned. That's what happens when you feed your spells too much raw meat. They become poisonous. I'm really happy with the look of some of the creatures, but it's still sometimes hard to see why some effects happen. For example, I think I single hit this creature because I managed to hit its very small unprotected head or neck. I'm thinking that I might reduce the color palette somewhat, so that, for example, armor always has the same color and then it's easier to read the creature body features. So we're now fighting Generation 5 and it looks like the larger creatures didn't actually prevail. We seem to be faced mainly with these long-legged spider-like beasts at the moment. Sorry to all arachnophobes. Luckily, just like in real life, they're more afraid of us than we are of them, right? I got the feeling that their underside is less protected than their backs, but it was hard to hit them from below. Okay, let's look at some statistics. The overall damage increased steadily. Armor scale size increased and then decreased again. The distance between scales changed in the opposite direction. Armor thickness increased, and so did the overall armor effectiveness. The overall score had a dip in the middle, but otherwise tended to increase. Alright, let's continue. At the next depth, a third witch joins us. This is the damage class. She starts with a crossbow and can throw spirits the farthest. I decided I want her to throw cold spirits because those slow the creatures down somewhat. I also found a cool crossbow for her and then she died immediately in the next ambush. Somehow the creatures in this cave seem to have stronger bodies again. And because they all look so similar, it makes me think that some creature in the parent generation must have passed on a lot of genes. I got quite lost in this cave and that still makes me happy. Because these more quiet times build the tension and make the encounters all the more unique and exciting. But I do want to add more places to find and I need more variations in the plant life. Also, imagine dark underground rivers and lakes. That would be so cool. In Generation 7 I had to deal with some medium-sized creatures, some small jumpers and spider-like creatures again. Almost all the genes came from a single cave from Generation 6 above. I also found a breeder with 7 processor slots and started breeding some powerful explosive spells. And I found a spirit crystal with 13 slots in it. All the spirits that are in a spirit crystal try to clone themselves at the same time. So that means as soon as the crystal is full, lots of new spirits spill into the processor chain and your breeder fills up very quickly. It finally feels like I have that crowd control that I wanted. At Generation 8, I think was the first time I really had to wait for the breeding to finish, because I didn't spend time re-equipping. When you compare this to earlier versions of the game, where I sometimes had to wait for minutes for a generation to breed, I'm really happy with the progress. I think sometimes it becomes quite obvious here that the creatures tend to benefit from fighting in groups. When they pile up on me like this, then they do quite some damage and quite often manage to kill my AI companions. But then there are encounters with single large creatures like this, where they hardly stand a chance because I can mostly hit them with ranged weapons. Alright, we've almost reached the goal. There's just one final level in Generation 10. But before we go there, let's look at some statistics. Now, we can see that there are some clear trends in some statistics, while other variables fluctuated around. So far, that's all expected. Imagine in real life, if we plotted the average over all humans' hair colors, we'd probably get a value that only slightly fluctuates around some pretty static value, especially if we only look at a small time span. On the other hand, things like exposure to new pathogens and diseases can drive some traits quite quickly. Following this analogy, my goal for the campaign is that you, the player, is basically the pathogen. The example of the hair color also shows that just building the average here is probably not the right thing to do. In the future, I need to show distributions instead. For this final level, I now have some very powerful spells. All my witches have quite a bit of health because they leveled up a few times. The final cave is going to be handcrafted. For now, this is only a placeholder, but I want the run to end in an epic scene. I imagine a single, very large giant mushroom that is defended by the siblings of the strongest creatures that you've encountered so far. There should be some surprises, and the loot should contain some things that you can unlock for the next campaigns. I think I might design this cave on live stream at some point. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in that. Well, beating this last generation wasn't too hard. This definitely needs some work before it becomes the epic showdown that I imagine. Now that we've won, I decided to render out all the creatures involved in this run. Overall, there were 241. Just visually, you can quickly see that there's quite some variation. I believe that the mutation rate of 30% was actually much too high, so evolution never really got a chance to build variations of a successful creature type. We can render out only the top performers in sequence, which shows that a similar kind of medium-sized creature with long front legs usually won the race. From the second run, I just want to show a few quick impressions. This time I used a much lower mutation rate but higher number of creatures per level, so evolution has more of a chance to do its thing. This time I decided I wanted to mainly use ranged weapons and try cold and poison based spells. The idea was that I could slow down the creatures enough for my poison and my crossbow to defeat them. And I did manage to poison some of them. But after just 1 or 2 generations, it became quite clear that my current build was too weak. They were just too small and too jumpy for me to hit. Even smaller groups often ambushed me successfully. For their jumps to remain so large, they must maintain the right leg muscle to body volume ratio. Creatures with smaller legs or larger bodies can't jump as far. A second witch joined me again, but our bolts were mostly blocked by the armor that the creatures had evolved. I feel like around generation 4 there were some more trials in different body shapes. Some had longer legs and... wait, is that a crab? Well, I guess that shouldn't surprise us. So it was high time to build some more powerful spells and get more company. Together we did deal quite some damage, but the creatures still almost got us all. So I re-equipped again, and I think that this was my most powerful build so far. As I finish the last few levels here, I want to try and give a summary and my verdict for the current state of the game. First and foremost, the game is playable. For me, adding the new permadeath option really spiced things up, because if I had ever lost all 3 witches, the game would have been over. In fact, there was one run that I didn't show here, where I didn't even get beyond the first generation. Most of the encounters were quite fun to play. I'm not gonna lie, all the jumping was a bit annoying at times. I've since changed the code to reduce that. But many of the ambushes felt almost deliberate, which was so cool, because it's something that simply emerges from the creature's genes and their AI, and is not scripted. There are 2 or 3 game-breaking bugs that I need to fix. Sometimes the creatures tunnel through the ground in weird ways, and sometimes the frame rate still drops a little too low. I think I'm not cleaning up everything correctly when I finish one level and start the next. I was a little worried that too much focus would lie on the spirits and the spell casting and breeding, but I do think it ties quite well into the game. There's a ton of balancing to do. In the 2 runs that I showed, I had access to every type of weapon and spell, and I guess the creatures evolved somewhat similar generalist shapes. In the future I might limit the resources a bit more and make some effects stronger. For example, strong armor should block almost all physical damage, but be quite heavy so that it slows the creatures down in return. But before making all of these decisions, I need to gather more data, so I've decided to start playtesting. I'll start with friends for the first round and then prioritize people who support the game on Patreon and Discord before opening the game to the public. Remember that if you're interested, all the links are below. That's it for today. Thanks for all the support and see you soon.